Hello, students, everyone in the audience. I'm super happy to do a lecture with you again. So it's gonna get quite technical, but I mean, you knew what you signed up for. So today I'm gonna introduce you to Docker, because perhaps everyone heard about Docker, right? But I don't think that a lot of people know what it actually is. And this is something that you see now everywhere in job descriptions. And well, you can't really go far without at least understanding what Docker is. So I will try to, well, give you some understanding. Well, 55 minutes for this kind of talk is nowhere near enough. So a disclaimer at the start. This, how basically what we're gonna do today, right? So this is how to draw an awl. Yeah, so you can just draw two circles and then you draw the rest of the damn awl. So the talk is gonna be like something like this, okay? So let's first draw two circles, okay? So as we know, code is just text, right? This is just ASCII characters, text characters that are stored in some files on your computer. And it has some, fancy characters like curly brace or things that you have trouble finding on your keyboards. Yeah, but then basically this is just dead characters. It needs something to run. Yeah, so it needs an operating system. It needs a language runtime. And without this, the code is pretty much dead and useless. So you need to run it. It wouldn't run on its own, right? So this is the screenshot from your setup day where you are setting up Airbnb in order to run Ruby, right? But that also means that in order to install that Airbnb, you need to have a computer with an operating system and other stuff configured, yeah? So you need to go through all that just to be able to bring that code that you wrote, those dead characters, to life, okay? And this is what you do. So you did the setup, you wrote some code, looks good to me, all right? You're super happy, you run it, and the Rails starts and everything is great and you are happy, right? So the thing is that you already know that the fact that something works in your machine doesn't really mean anything, because you need to deploy the code to production, you need other colleagues to work on the same code. So let's just imagine that currently we are using Ruby 2.6.6, and now I'm installing the new Ruby version. I'm saying, okay, let's use the Ruby 2.7.0. And then bam, you just try to run the server and it says the version of bundler is wrong, the version of Ruby is wrong, okay, and you need to install everything again. So especially, if you just finished the bootcamp and you followed that setup once, but like be prepared for the fact that the setup is always gonna break because things update. So you need to know how to debug it and how to reinstall your dependencies. So you will come to the setup page, come back to it quite often. So there is a magical world where these problems don't exist, right? And this magical world is Docker, okay? So first, we'll start with a tiny flashback. Okay, so you all remember the stupid coaching exercise, right? So we're just gonna do it again. Yeah, and this was the tagline, the punchline of stupid coaching, okay? Okay, so let's try, okay? So I'm going to share my entire screen now. Okay, and I have this little stupid coaching right here. So I'm gonna open it in my Visual Studio Code. Okay, and this is what we're dealing with. All right, so let me, let me make it a bit smaller. All right, yeah, so this is the code. It's quite simple. Yeah, you all remember stupid coaching exercise, right? Okay, so let's run it. So how do I run it? Who can remind me how do I run Ruby code? No, no one. All right. So we'll say Ruby interface.rb, and it runs.
Andre, you can check in the chat. Actually, people usually write in the chat so that they're not interrupting you. So maybe, yeah, make sure.
Yeah, I have the chat there. All right. Okay.
Yeah, that's where the answer.
Ruby file name. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So then you say, hey, it says I don't care, get dressed to work. I say, hey, with the question mark, I don't care, get dressed to work, and I am ready to work right now, I think. I can feel your motivation. Well, anyway, right? So this works. Okay. So I can stop the program. And I just ran it on my operating system, yes? So I just ran it on my operating system. I have all the Ruby dependencies installed and so on, okay? So this code will run on any version of Ruby pretty much, yeah? Unless I do something like this. So I can say if, and there is this constant Ruby version. So I can say it's not equals to, for instance, 266. Then I'm going to exit the process. And then I'm going to say wrong Ruby, right? And maybe put a little emoji there, okay? So let's see now. So again, I'm trying to run this code. It works. Now I want to change the Ruby version. So imagine just someone pulled that code on another machine with the wrong Ruby version. I try to run it. It doesn't run, all right? Okay, so coming back to the Docker slides. Okay, so simple code runs on any Ruby unless we do something like that, yeah? Then it's not gonna run. And I do this to sort of simulate the more complex code, like Rails, for instance, you know, where like Rails has dependencies. This dependencies needs to be of a certain version. As soon as you update Rails, you also need to update dependencies and so on. Okay, so let's Dockerize it, yeah, to make sure that this is going to work. So then I'm going to tell you a bit later, you know, what Docker is all about conceptually, but you can think of it as being able to put your code in a box, only that box already has an operating system and all the dependencies that you need, all right? So in order to Dockerize something, we basically just need to create a file in the same folder as our project and name it Docker file, all right? So Docker file is a plain text format that just has a series of commands that will be used by Docker to run your application. So what is Docker? Docker, think of it as just this program that runs on your computer. So you see it's here in the dock, and it says, well, Docker desktop is running. Okay, so this is just some application that you install, and it's able to run code in these boxes. Okay, and this application, it exists for all operating systems. So you have Docker for Windows, you have Docker for Mac, you have Docker for Linux. And as soon as you have Docker, you don't really, it can run any container. So that means that you can run Linux container on Windows, or you can run Windows container on a Mac. So you basically don't care about it anymore, all right? So you just let Docker running, okay? So in Docker file, the simplest way to Dockerize it is just gonna be something like that, to say from Ruby 266, and then I'm just gonna say copy everything in this folder inside the container, and basically that is the minimal Docker file that you can have. So this line from Ruby 266 ensures that we are starting with an environment that has Ruby configured, and you will see a bit later what kind of environment that is. Okay, but you're absolutely sure that if you are, this is called a base image. So if you are starting from Ruby 266 base image, you can be absolutely sure that anything Ruby 266 is going to work there, all right? Okay, so let's see what should we do next. Next, we should use Docker, like we use Docker from command line. So there is like Docker executable in your command line, and then you have, well, a lot of flags and commands and anything that you can run. So I'm just gonna show you a few. So I can say Docker build, give it a name. So the name is gonna be coach, right? From the current folder, so you put a path, a relative path to the folder where the Docker file is located. And as you can see, the Docker file is located in the same folder, okay? And then I can say end docker run something that I called coach. So we call this box. Yeah, it's called a container. The proper name is container. So I call this container coach. And I'm going to also attach my terminal to it. Yeah. And then I am also going to, well, let's just run it and see what happens. Okay. Okay, so I am inside the IRB. Yeah. So the thing is that that base image that you started from, when you just run it, it just puts you inside the IRB. Okay. All right. So what else can I do? I can say, okay, run in this container, run bash. Yeah. So run the shell, run the terminal. Yeah. Sort of. Okay. So now I'm inside the container, and I can check. I can say ls, and these are the files that I have in my root folder. Okay. They look a little bit weird. Yeah. So I have my project files. So here is Docker file interface and coach, and then I have a bunch of these folders. Yeah. Because of what I did here in my copy instruction, I just put all the files. I just put all the files in the root. Okay. So basically, now we can run interface.rb, and it's going to run. All right. And then I don't care if I exit here. I change my Ruby version to 2.7.0. It still runs because it runs in a container that has Ruby. If I check the Ruby version here, then inside the container, the Ruby version is always 2.6.6. All right. So isn't that super cool? Okay. Okay. So now what I can do while I'm in the bash, I can actually check what kind of operating system that is, right? Because I'm running on Mac. But if I run this command, it's going to tell me that the operating system is actually Debian GNU Linux. Okay. So the container itself contains the full operating system. And this is not a virtual machine. As you can see, it runs very, very fast. You don't need to boot a virtual machine. So Docker, below the hood, does something very smart. So it basically uses the kernel of your host operating system and puts a layer of a foreign operating system on top of that. Okay, and I won't go into the details, but it basically allows you to sort of like simulate another operating system without the virtualization. Okay, so here it's Debian. Okay, if I go here, if I go to my Docker file and I say, you know what, I don't want Debian because Debian, takes some space. I want Alpine, which is a very small distribution of Linux. Okay, and now I'm gonna run this command again. So what's gonna happen now is going to download the distribution for the Alpine image in a container format. And it doesn't even have shell because Alpine is so minimal, it doesn't have bash. It has just a proper shell, okay? So now I'm inside Alpine. If I check for the release of this, then you see it's the Alpine Linux, okay? So that means I can run in any operating system. I can run code in any operating system I want, and doesn't matter what kind of operating system I have on my computer. All right, this is pretty much awesome. Okay, coming back to the slides. It's a bit annoying here that I always have to like reshare my screen to be able to use Keynote properly, but that's fine. Where's my Keynote? Share screen. Keynote. All right. Okay, so as you can see, this is Linux. You have like a tiny penguin, like right in your Mac. Okay. Okay, we can keep building. So basically, this Docker file that I showed you, this one, is very basic. Of course, like real world Docker files, and at the end you will see like the real world Docker files, they are way more evolved, but it shows you the concepts. You always start from some base image that can either be like a pure operating system, like Debian, Alpine, Ubuntu, or something, or it can be one of the language runtimes, in this case Ruby, which is basically Debian operating system with Ruby installed. Okay, and then there is this. Well, later I will show you the website called Docker Hub, where you can see what all these images are about. Okay, so a more evolved Docker file. So what we can do here, we can say, look, by default, the Ruby version in this container is going to be 2.6.6. Yeah. But then I will have a freedom if I want to run it with any Ruby version actually. So I can pass another flag here to the Docker executable and I say use the build argument Ruby version 2.7.0 and it's going to replace this with 2.7.0. All right. Then I also don't want to put all the files in the root of my Linux operating system. So I can say create a work directory, name it /app, then copy everything there. And then, so I don't have to type docker run coach and then the file that I want to run. I can just say the entry point of that container is, you know, interface RB, and you will see how it works. Okay, so let's try to recreate that. So stop share. This is annoying. Share screen 1. So now if I go back to Visual Studio Code, let's do this. Let's use another command from the Docker, which is called arg. Actually, as you can see for VS Code, you can install a very simple extension for Docker that just gives you the documentation for all these commands so you can understand what they mean. So I'm going to set an argument Ruby version and default it to 2.6.6. Then here, I just need to say Ruby version. This is a environment variables, think of it like that, right? Then I need to create the working directory. So there is a special command for this work there. I will call it app. It's going to create the directory and also CD into it. Then I'm going to copy all the files inside the container from my host operating system. And then I'm going to run the entry point, which is Ruby. And then you put all the arguments to the executable as an array, interface RB. Okay, nice. So then I can build again. And now I can just run it, just run the container name. And as you can see, I'm directly inside the program. Okay, so if I run it again, I'm directly inside the program. Okay, so this is me talking to coach. This small Ruby executable runs inside a Linux operating system that runs on top of my macOS, on top of my, like, macOS is Darwin, right? The flavor of BSD named Darwin. So it runs on top of my Darwin. Okay, this is super cool and super easy. So basically that means that if, I don't know, you want to download someone's super complicated project that normally will take you like an hour just to set up, you don't have to do it. You just pull the image, run it. Everything is already in the image, everything in the box, everything runs. Okay. So let's carry on. I'm going to share my keynote again. Where is the keynote? Okay, so think of this as a layered cake. So if you take a good look at what is the output if you run the Docker container, it tells you, all right, I'm pulling from library Ruby, so I'm pulling the image for the Ruby 2.6.6. And then everything that you have in your Docker file is a layer that gets added on top of that. So they use a special operating system, file system that allows them to just sum these layers together. And if you already built one of the layers, then it's not going to be built again. It's just going to be taken from cache. You see here it says using cache. Okay, so think of it as just like a layered cake. Okay, so let's now talk about images and containers, because these are the words that you hear most often when you talk about, Robert is asking, like a virtual machine. Well, it's not a virtual machine logger. That's Robin, that's the whole point. But I'm going to talk about it more. Okay, it's not a virtual machine. Docker uses containerization, which just runs code, which basically just piggybacks another operating system on top of your existing kernel. Okay, so images, you can think of them as a mold for a layer cake. So image is a description of the layers that you need to run a box. And the container is something that runs, and it is, well, an actual cake, all right? An actual cake, okay? So it's all about isolation, really. Okay, it's all about isolation because it allows you to put in the same box, and now you can hear Joy Division isolation playing in the background. It can put the language runtime, the file system, the operating system, all the binary dependency it needs. You know, I don't know, Postgres, Sidekick, whatever. It allows you to control the network ports, so you can say, okay, this container is only going to be mapped to the port 3000 on my machine. Okay. Users and groups, okay, so you can be root on your machine, but you can be something else inside the container, or you can be a regular user on your machine, you can be root inside the container, all right? So it gives you sort of like more control and allows for isolation. Again, answering the Robin question, I have a special slide about that. It is not a virtual machine, and this is the difference, okay? This is taken from the Docker website. And basically, the difference is that with a normal virtual machine, you have your infrastructure, you have a computer, right? In our case, the laptop. And then you have a virtual machine that basically pretends to be another computer. It emulates a full computer, it emulates a full hardware, including the CPU, in software on your machine. And then, you know, inside there is an operating system running and the apps in this operating system. So with Docker, it's much simpler. You have your host operating system and Docker just piggybacks on top of it, okay? So actually it uses something from Linux. So Docker didn't invent this. Actually, you can sort of, if you're good at Linux, you can implement your own Docker very quick, because Docker basically uses two ideas from Linux, which is IP tables and C groups. If everyone is a little bit inside, like in Linux, they should have heard about this. And this just basically allows to like isolate processes on a Linux box. Yeah. So and Docker just leverages all that and like packages it nicely and gives you a nice UX. Okay, so let's talk about Docker. So in the future, where everything is Dockerized, Docker is great for local development because you don't have to think about dependencies, compatibility, and whether it's going to run on another machine or on a server anymore. Code plus all the environment for its code is contained in one container, which is described by one image. The thing is that tutorials lie. So what I showed you is very, very simple. And if you go like and Google Docker getting started, you know, you will see something like that. The thing is that like it's a big lie. If you need to run a production application, then you don't need, like, you never have one image and one container. Okay, because like let's talk about Rails. So if you run Rails, you need one process, which is Rails server, and another process, which is, I don't know, Rails console, then another process, which is Sidekick, then another process, which is Webpack Dev Server. If you're testing it with system test, then you need another process that is Chrome, right? Then you need another process that is Redis and so on, and Selenium. So it looks like this. You need actually all these images, and you need to run all these images together on some sort of a network that also exists just inside your computer. And rule of thumb, one container, one process. So the beginner mistake, often you start with Docker thinking, hey, I can do an image, let's just put everything in that image. Well, that's a mistake, and that's a misuse of Docker. This is how you use with virtual machines. With Docker, you don't have to. You can run as many containers on your computer as humanly possible, because Docker containers are very light. They don't take a lot of resources. And there is another tool developed by Docker that allows you to compose these containers together. So for instance, I need 5 containers running at the same time, and this is called Docker Compose. I'm not going to stop here. I'm not going to explain what Docker Compose is, but this is also something that you will need to understand if you want to start with Docker, okay? So now a small demo time, and this is the part where we draw the rest of the demo, okay? So I'm just going to show you like a real world production setup of applications that we use at Wagon, okay? So because we are migrating from Heroku to Kubernetes and we are using containers. So I'm gonna share the screen. Okay, so there is a repository that you can also visit. There's going to be a link at the end of the slide, which is called Wagon/Rails Kubernetes demo. And there is like documentation. And it is a source code for the website that is demo.lowagon.co, C-O, not com. And this is a chat. So it works. I can say, hey class, today we are talking about docker.com, okay? And what this chat does, so in order to understand, I had to build a very simple application, but I had to build it using like the full Rails stack. So what happens here is when I send this HTTP request, the message is actually going to be sent to the sidekick in background. In background, the sidekick is going to parse the message and figure out if there are URLs there. Yeah, everyone can use it. Parse if there are URLs there. If there are URLs there, it's going to extract a preview of that URL, so load that website, make a request, do a preview, and then send it back through action cable to the front end, which is done with Webpacker and Stimulus. Okay, so it looks simple, but it uses the whole stack, and of course it's PostgreSQL database. Okay, so let's see how it works. So I send it, and then you see it takes the link, it figures out that this is a link, even though it have no HTTP or anything, and then it does a little, like attaches this little preview here. All right. So, and this is the code for this application. So I'm not gonna stop on how this application works because this is not important. The important is how this application is containerized and deployed. Okay. So let's take a small look at the anatomy of this application. Okay, I hope this is big enough. All right. So what we have here is a pretty standard Rails app. I'm just going to close all. Yeah. Okay. And I didn't really change the application part a lot. But what I did, I added a couple of files here in the root that are important to containerize it. So there is a Docker file. And as you can see, it looks a bit more complex than what you've seen, right? Because the idea here that for every layer, you need to install dependencies in like the most efficient sort of way possible. So these commands, they just go around the internet. You can Google them to understand why exactly there are so many, flags in this. But what I'm doing here, I'm doing the apt-get. Yeah, so again, it's like Docker is pretty much always Linux as a base image. So I'm using apt-get to install, I don't know, some dependency. And also I'm starting not from Ruby image, I'm starting from Wagon Rails-based Chrome image magic image that you can also find here. Again, image is a description of a container, right? That you can find here. And if you look at the Docker file, this is the image, okay? So we start from Ruby 2.6.6, then we install PostgreSQL client, we install Yarn, we install Node, we install everything that we need, we install Chrome, and we install Image Magic, okay? And the thing is that to set up all that on your machine, you will spend, I don't know, like a couple of hours if you're doing it for the first time, right? And here it's already bundled and packaged and layered for you, and think of it like a gift, okay? So this is the Docker file, okay? And then there is another file which is called Docker Compose. So Docker Compose allows me to run a lot of services together, okay? So this is a YAML file, so it's just a plain YAML. And in a certain format, the documentation is available, of course, at docker.com. And you can see that I'm defining several services. So I'm defining a service called Rails, which runs my container with the command to execute bundle exec Rails server, okay? And it also does like this little thing because it's a bug in Rails when I have to remove server PID before I start and so on. Okay, then it says the port 3000 inside the container, map it to the port 3000 on my host, okay? So I can access whatever is on port 3000 inside the container from my host. Then I have the same container for another service, another container for Sidekick, that uses the same Docker image, but starts it not with Rails S, but it starts with bundle exec Sidekick because Sidekick is a separate process. I have the same for Webpacker. I have the same for Postgres. And you see how easy it is with Postgres. I just say use Postgres image. That's it. There are Postgres images available online. It just uses that image and spins it up. I use Reddit, the same thing. And this volumes tells me that, okay, I'm also caching some of the files on my host to make the process faster, like node modules and like Postgres, actual database and so on. I'm not gonna dive deep into the context, but this you can study that repository later to understand all the steps that are involved, because we are trying at Wagon to create the the perfect Docker setup for Rails applications, for standard Rails applications. So let's see. Then we have another file which is called deep.yaml, and deep is a very cool little thing. So let me just show you what it is. So on GitHub, this is done by my colleague at Evil Martians, because perhaps you heard that, but besides working full-time at Wagon, I'm also part of the Evil Martians Collective, which is this Rails consultants company, and I help them with their blog. So please, a minute of advertisement, please go to evilmartians.com blog. It's called Martian Chronicles, and we have a lot of articles that usually I ghostwrite all of them, about design, about front end, about the back end, about the client work that we do, and really cool stories. So it's a nice resource. Use it. Okay. So my colleague from Evil Martians developed this tool called DIP. DIP stands for Docker Interaction Process. So basically what it does, it allows you to use Docker Compose, but in a way that's very similar to the way you use Rails. So let's see. So let's say that you want to run Rails S. So let's run Rails S, and this is Rails server running, but it's not running. Whoops. Why? Because I have wrong Ruby version on my machine. Yeah. Let's solve it. What if I type deep Rails S? Then you see that it does everything that it needs. It creates all the containers. It creates the network between them. It runs the Rails app, and it exposes port 3000 to my machine. It takes very little time. So the overhead is maybe, I don't know, extra few seconds. And now here I can go to localhost 3000, and I'm going to see the application. So we see Webpacker is compiling, right? I'm going to see the application starting up. Okay. And I'm here. I'm running the application locally. So now imagine that, I want you to work on that project. So I just say, come on, just pull that image, run it, and it works. And also it's set up in a way that the code is actually not copied inside the container. It's mapped inside the container. So I can edit the code and work with it as if it was my machine. The setup is all that, it's completely invisible. Okay. So this runs just the Rails server. So for instance, I want to go to the Rails console. Very simple, deep Rails C. Okay. Now I'm inside the console, and I can check what's inside my database. All right. So I'm using Zoom that uses a lot of processor power, but usually it's even faster. Okay. Now I want to run deep Rails sidekick. So I have a sidekick. All right. So I can, if I want, I can open it all on different tabs and run this process. Or I can do this, deep up, and it's going to run all the containers at the same time and log them in one interface. So you have Postgres logging, Redis logging, Sidekick logging, Webpacker logging, and so on. All right. So now you see everything has started up. I don't need a lot of tabs. I go here, I refresh, and then I say, test if that still works, wagon.com. And it still works, and it fetches the links, and everything is done with Action Cable. All right. So that's pretty much magical. The thing is that it takes a lot of time to zero in on the good configuration, and this is what we're doing for you, right? That's a very good starting point to start learning that, because you can look at every step in this, Docker file, Docker Compose YAML and deep YAML. I think, okay, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And actually, we are building our work, so you can think of it as sort of collaboration with DigitalOcean and Evil Martians on this little resource that is called, I think it's the best title ever. It's a shame I didn't come up with it, but it's called Ruby on Whales. Because Docker, the whale, right? And it built on this series of advice on how to Dockerize a Ruby application, but then it's even simplified a bit even more. But basically, this is the source of truth. Okay. So let's go back to the presentation. I think I'm still on track, which is very surprising. So am I still sharing the screen? Yes? I'm trying to understand where my Zoom is. All right. Okay, stop share and start sharing the screen again. And we are sharing the keynote. All right. So again, we had the demo time, right? Which was about drawing the rest of the demo. So now you perhaps also heard about something called Kubernetes, yeah? And people tend to think that this is like Docker versus Kubernetes, which is not exactly true. They are like, you know, peanut butter and jelly, you know? So Kubernetes is just great for production, okay? So like Docker is something that Docker and Docker Compose is something you use locally to make your development environment reproducible. Then Kubernetes is the way you orchestrate containers in production, on your production cluster, okay? I'm not gonna go here, but I'm gonna do a very small demo of deployment at the end, okay? So Docker is not about Docker versus Kubernetes, it's about Docker and Kubernetes working together. So the next logical step after you learn Docker is to learn Kubernetes to understand how to deploy containers to production. There is this very nice resource you can start with, the Illustrated Children's Guide to Kubernetes. It's like an 8-minute animation that is like super sweet, and it's basically made by the developer, like whose 8-year-old daughter asked him, "Daddy, what is Kubernetes?" Yeah, so it's so sweet, it makes me want to cry, and you can check it out. It actually explains all the concepts very, very well. And then, of course, you can use this for the starting point for your Docker/Kubernetes setup, because that resource also contains Kubernetes manifest. And then on a little bit of like personal promotion, this website, it's my personal website, so you can go to this. But the thing is that I'm not just doing it to promote my personal website. It's just like an example of what you can do with containers and isolation. So here, when you go on this website, you can go on it right now, you actually, every time you come in, a small Docker container is created just for you, all right? And you're inside the Alpine Linux, so you can run like ls, you know. You can, okay, there is a file called can I hack it hack. You can hack it, you can cat it, all right. And then the thing is that if you want to see the actual website, just launch the executable hello that I wrote in Go. So that's not CSS, that's not CSS and HTML. This is an actual terminal application with a text user interface. It looks like it's something from the, you're still seeing the keynote. Sorry about that. I knew that it's not going to work at some point. Come again. Come again. I'm going to share the screen. Share. All right, so let's go. PROGAPANDAORG. So as you see, you land inside the Docker container. And then there is WebSocket like transmitting standard in and standard out. So I can ls, there is a file called can I hack it.hack. So let's cat it. It says, well, you can try. So you can also try hack it if you want, okay? And in order to actually, like the website itself is an executable called hello, and it's not HTML, CSS. This is a program I specifically wrote for terminal in Go. Yeah. So now the screen can be seen, yeah? Okay, so this is, you know, you can use keyboard to navigate and so on, and then you can quit and you're back in the shell and you can type exit and it's gonna exit, it's gonna end your session. And then if you refresh the page, you land in the Docker container again, okay? So the source code for this is also on GitHub. It's written in Go, but it really shows you how you can abuse, you know, the containerization concepts. So it's basically like running Docker inside of Kubernetes. Okay, so it's like next level, but really like it's amazing what you can do. Sebastian, Sebastian, I don't know what vServer is. I don't know what you're referring to. What do you mean? You mean like a VPS, virtual private server, like DigitalOcean? Yeah, VPS. Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, it's super easy. Like on DigitalOcean, you can just provision a VPS that has a Docker host already. And then if you send a container there, it's going to run. And this is how I run actually some of my services. It's like the easiest way to deploy something without Kubernetes. You just provision a droplet with the Docker host, and then you SSH into it, you pull the image and run it. And you leave it alone, and it runs forever, okay? Yeah, so where can we find this on GitHub? Well, I mean, you have to go to my website actually, because on the website it says where you can find this on GitHub. Yeah, and this is the source code. Yeah, and actually this runs on a single droplet on DigitalOcean that cost me $10 a month, which is, I think, pretty good for something that is so resourced, like so like a stack that is not very standard. I think it's pretty good cost saving. Okay. All right, and then deploying to Kubernetes is really something super easy. Let me show you something before we go to questions. So this is the demo application, the chat application that you've seen. This is the interface to the Kubernetes cluster. Okay, and now let's say that I want to deploy a new version. Okay, so I can just say, without a setup, I can just say make. Oh no, I'm in the wrong thing. So first, I want to make sure that I have a context of the right cluster. I have the right context, and now I can run the command make upgrade dev. This is how I called it, but doesn't matter. And it just rolls out a new release into the cluster. And now if I take a look at what happens inside the cluster, I will see that there is a new container being created that is going to migrate my database. And then it's gonna create new versions of this container that contain the latest code and remove the old containers. All right. And the whole deploy takes, I don't know, about like a minute, 2 minutes. And if you just deployed something, it already cached those images. It can take seconds to redeploy. All right. And well, I think this is even easier than Heroku actually, but like once you set it up. Okay. Okay, so coming back to slides. Stop the share. Start the share. Actually, there are no more slides, so let's just talk about it. Yeah. I think it would be a nice QA time, as I think we have about what, 10 minutes, Celine?
Yeah, let's have a 10 minutes short Q&A, because then it would be great if we could finish at 10:55 to jump on the other meeting afterwards. But yeah, feel free to ask your questions for 10 minutes to finish.
What about the malicious code? No, that's the whole thing. That's about container isolation. You remember that Joy Division slide? So, I mean, technically it uses the same kernel, yeah, as your main operating system, but it's pretty well isolated. So there is this attack that is called like Docker breakout, but it's hard to achieve, and it gets harder and harder to achieve the longer Docker exists. And actually, if you find the breakout vulnerability for Docker, the company, is gonna pay you, I think, like a couple of millions of dollars if you prove that. All right. So this is actually also good something if you want to become a so-called white hat hacker. This is how people make money. You find vulnerability in a very popular product, and then they pay you. And they pay, it's absolutely ethical. So they have a bounty for them, all right? Bug bounty. All right, other questions? Can we get an animation for an 8-year-old on all this? This is my attempt for the animation, because you see like my Docker, like my keynote, it actually has like unicorns, right? So it's pretty much for 8-year-old girls, yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think there was one above, the one from Robert, the one about malicious code. This is the one you said, or the one about?
What resources do you recommend if we want? Well, I recommend just Googling for like general Docker introduction posts. There is a good series of posts on Medium, I think. It's like 4 or 5 parts introduction to Docker. And would you appreciate pull requests to make it more beautiful? What, my website or the chat?
Yeah,
Which
the
one?
website currently. Website.
Yeah, it's open source. You can do pull requests. So basically what it does, it just runs terminal in the browser, exactly like VS Code runs terminal. So you can't really improve on terminal, right? And then anything that it runs inside the terminal as well, it's the terminal, okay? So, and then of course I recommend this Rails Kubernetes demo, Wagon/Rails Kubernetes demo, because this just is sort of like the essence of best practices, and it's constant work in progress. So we are making it better, and services that like checked your code, for instance, when you were students, they run on this stack. Yeah?
Andy,
so
I have a question.
Your code been actually checked inside the Docker containers. Yeah, Robert, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question about the usage of Docker. So I can imagine it makes sense if I need a certain OS or I need certain dependencies that it makes it very easy, or if I want to test my app to see if it works on different systems or whatever.
Yeah.
Is there any other main usage, or are these kind of the 2 main usages?
Yeah, like the main usage is isolating code, putting together code and runtime. So the main usage for local development is you have a team and you pull the code from GitHub, but you pull the code together with Docker files. So in order to run application without like spending any time on setup, you just run Docker run, you know? And it's just, let me actually show you, there is this command that is called dip provision. Again, this is not part of Docker, this is dip, that little thing. But if I run dip provision, what it's gonna do is gonna remove all containers. It's gonna build all the new images again.
We don't see your screen.
Okay, so it's gonna remove all the containers. It's gonna build all images. And it's gonna install all the gems and so on. And it will just be a pristine state and it will work on any machine. Okay? So you can git clone Wagon/Rails Kubernetes demo. If you have dip installed and Docker installed, then you can just run dip provision and it's gonna run. Okay? So that's the main use case. Does it answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
You mentioned we can give it access to the different ports. Does that account also for, like, for example, the webcam and stuff like this?
No, but a webcam is not a port. Yeah, so we are talking about port in the Unix sense, like the operating system ports. Okay, and well, yes, certainly. I mean, if you can, like, yeah, if you want, you can totally, I think, access your webcam from inside of the Docker container by like mapping something. I don't know, but it's like, it's really like, I understand the question, but I think I even understand where it goes, but I think it's like, it's not really what Docker is about. Okay?
Yeah, I was just thinking it might be a nice way to containerize Zoom and stuff like this to get it away from your real machine, you know, kind of.
Maybe, but the thing is that also like all that Zoom thing is like very much overrated. Like things they do, they are like not nice per se, but they don't compromise the security of your operating system. There is like this thing called Jitsi Meet, which is also you can, as a Docker container, you can run actually your own Zoom server. It's distributed in Docker containers too. Jitsi, Gitsi.
Cool, thank you.
Hub Docker.com, Zoom. Yeah, maybe this is containerized Zoom, actually. Let me take a look. Yeah. So basically, but it will be the Linux version of Zoom, right? Running on your Mac. And Linux version of Zoom sucks. But you can find anything
right now.
Huh? Yeah.
On it right now, I'm a native Debian.
Okay, nice. No, but I mean, I mean, good for you, but the thing is, like, it's just has less features than the Mac version, unfortunately. But you can find anything. So Docker Hub is like one of the resources where Docker images are located. And for instance, like the image that runs that text user interface, it's called PROGAPANDAORG.hello. You can pull it and you're just gonna run it in your terminal. The program that, so actually let's try. So if I pull, you can ask more questions in the meantime if you want. So if I do docker pull PROGAPANDAORG hello and docker run PROGAPANDAORG hello. Yep. So if I need to run with this flag IT, so I stay inside the process IT. And now if I run, let's say I run bash. There is no bash, there's only shell. I run shell and I can run hello, and there it is. I'm not running it on internet, I'm running it in my terminal. Okay? All right, other questions?
No.
All good?
All good. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Andrey. I'm gonna stop the recording now, and I will also, send it to everyone.
Thank you.
Let's have a short break and then join the other session about how to become a developer. See you, everyone.
Celine, if you can also tell me where to put the slides in PDF, for instance.
Yeah, you can just send it to me in PDF, and then I will transfer it to the on the Notion page. Yeah, no worries. You can just send it to me. I will do it.
Cool, I'll do it. Well, thank you, Celine. Thank you, guys. We're super happy to see you again. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day, Andrey.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.